I used to think that investing was hard, boring, or complicated, but I found the perfect stock investing course that showed me how to invest as a complete newbie. Now I can build wealth in the stock market and do all the things that I enjoy at the same time. Check out the Lazy Investor Stock course and get started on your wealth building journey today.
So how you doing, everybody? This is David W. Williams, also known as the retail trader, right? And so what we're going to talk about is the language of money. What you don't know will hurt you. And so what I want to really try to help you understand is that when you come into a space initially and you're not familiar with the space, you may not know the language of the space. So let me ask you a question. Do you know what is an onion? Let me put that up there as a question. What is an onion, right? So if I say, hey, I got an onion, do you know what that means? Right? So I'm going to ask the audience that real quick. Let that go ahead and go through the stream. So we're talking about when you come into a space, do you know the language of the space? Do you know the terminology and the jargon of the space, right? So if I tell you, I'm looking for an onion, right? I call you up and say, hey, man, I'm looking for an onion. What does that mean to you if I say I'm looking for an onion? Right? Asking the audience. So we'll wait for that to go ahead and go through the stream real quick, get some audience engagement, like we was talking about a relationship situation or talking about Deion Sanders' son. All right, let's do that. And then what we'll do is, so we'll go ahead and do that. So if I ask you, what is an onion, what does that mean? Okay, so Tim Moss say he don't know. Okay. So Miss Barney says, never heard that in regards to money, but let's say it wasn't in regards to money. What would you think it mean? Miss Barnett, if I called you up and say, hey, Brittany, I'm sorry. If I said, Brittany, I'm looking for an onion, what would you think I was talking about? Right? And big up to you. Hope you're having a good morning. Mr. Webb say, I don't know. Okay, big up to Cedric Webb. Appreciate your engagement. What's up to Miss Phoenix 91? Right? My Life Money Media. So the question, My Life Money Media, is if I called you and say I'm looking for an onion, what would it mean? Okay, Wealth Scientist, appreciate the 999 super sticker. GC, what's up with it? So Cool Breeze, is that your answer to what that is? So insurance, current mitigation of third-party risk. I appreciate it. Layers to something, right? That makes sense. Okay, so it would depend on what environment we're in. So the example I'm using, if I tell you, hey, I'm looking for an onion, right? Where I'm from, if we say we're looking for an onion and we're not talking about actual, a vegetable. I believe an onion's a vegetable. We're not talking about a vegetable, right? An onion is an ounce of marijuana. So where I'm from, we call an ounce of marijuana an onion, right? That's slang for an ounce. Okay. So let me ask you another question, right? If I call you and say, I need a hammer. I don't know how that got in there. My bad. Let me get rid of that. Uh-oh. My bad, Ant Dog. So Ant Dog, my fault on that. I'll pull you back out later when I hit the wrong button. I'll say, what is I need a hammer. What do I mean? And like I said, my bad on that, and I'll pull you back out later. My fault on that. I hit the wrong button. I need a hammer. What do I mean? Right? Okay, so yeah, so well, from that means we're looking for a gun, right? So it would depend on what environment that you're in is what jargon is being used. So often we go into a new environment, we don't know the jargon, so we don't know the language that people are using. So then what happened is we will never know what's going on because we don't know the jargon of the environment, right? And so as you can sometimes go into new environments or meet people from different environments, you may not know the jargon that they're using, which means that they can be having a conversation with you. You don't even know what they're saying, But what it also can do is it create a confusion of expectations. So let me give an example. I was never really into like the online faith-based relationship space. That never really was my thing. And I kind of talked about like growing up around a lot of the televangelist people and just that not really being like a lot of faith-based media never really being my thing, right? And so one thing that when I kind of got introduced to that space, I realized that they kind of have their own jargon. So in that kind of like faith-based relationship space that's on the internet, they use terms like intentional a lot. They use that term like every 5 seconds. They use term courting a lot, like every 20 seconds. They use the term pursue, right? Well, you know, I want somebody to pursue me, or yada, yada, yada. Now, where I'm from, pursue means the police try to pull you over and you say, no, I'm not going to get pulled over, and you just drive off and the police chasing you. That's what we mean by pursuit. We never really use pursuit in a relationship context, right? We just never did. So then when I go into this space and they're talking about pursuit, my only framework is if the police try to pull you over and you say, no, I'm not going to allow them to pull me over, I'm just going to keep driving. So you drive off, now they're chasing you. Or if the police try to stop you in the street and you run off, you're now being pursued by the police. That was my only frame of reference. But they use the word pursue in a relationship framework a lot, and I had never been exposed to that. So here's the issue. If I'm talking to somebody that comes out of this online kind of like black faith space and they're using these words, but I don't really know what those words mean to them, I could be thinking I'm doing something based on my reference point, and they could be thinking I'm doing something different. Because why? We don't know what the definition of the word is amongst us. So I may not know what they mean by the word, and they may not know what I mean by the word. So I could be doing something and they could have an expectation of something, and we could not be connecting because why? We don't know what the other person is doing. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? And so what can happen is there can be a miscommunication, and there could be expectations that may not be met because I don't know what the other person is doing. Right? And what I mean by that is I don't know the other person's definition of the word. Okay. So one thing we got to realize is that when we're on this internet, we're meeting people from all different walks of life, from all different communities, from all different spaces. Right. And so what they may mean by something, I may not mean by something, and vice versa. Right. Or what they may feel like is offensive, it may not be offensive to me because where I'm from, that just may be how we talk. Right. And then vice versa. Okay. And so you can also sometimes tell where people kind of come out of, like there's this kind of based on age, but also their education level. You will have like black people will get on the internet and they'll use certain words. And where I'm from, nobody black talks like that. But a lot of these people come out of colleges. A lot of these people have, I would say, post-grad educations. And they'll get around black people and they use these certain words that come out of these certain communities. And like, I'm like, where I'm from, nobody talks like that. Like when I'm in Atlanta, in certain parts of Atlanta, nobody uses these kind of words. But in these kind of like internet intellectual / academic spaces, they use these words and they expect you to use these words. So I did an interview with a woman who she has a PhD, I think, in some type of mental health field. And we spent a large amount of the prep for that particular interview just getting our language together. Because the words in which I use to describe certain situations, she didn't like those words. So we spent a large amount of our prep trying to get on the same page with terminology and language, right? Because she comes out of a space where they use very, very specific words to describe specific things. And I didn't use words that way. I would describe scenarios a totally different way because I don't have a formal education in that particular field. I'm just speaking from my experiences. So what I'm trying to help you understand is that you can go into different spaces, but not necessarily understand the terminology of that space. And you may make the mistake of thinking that this stuff is complicated and the concepts are very basic. It's different words. And then once you learn the words that they're using in the space, you'll realize that the concepts are not really that complicated. It's just you're being gatekeeped out of the space with the words. So the reason why they use those words is because they want to find out, are you a member of this community? So you remember when Kevin Samuels really was doing his thing and he came up with those acronyms like high earner, not rich yet, which he didn't come up with. That had been around before, but he kind of made it mainstream, in my opinion. Well, everybody that came out of that space, you can know they was coming out of that Kevin Samuel space because they used those words. Right? I didn't use those words because I didn't come out of that space. I've never called somebody a Henry in my life unless their name actually was Henry. Right? So, saying women in the danger zone and all that stuff, those were the words they used in that space. And then it identified people with being from that space. Now, we know now, since he's passed away, those people have moved on to other spaces. So you'll get these little acronyms. And really what these people are really saying is that they come out of these particular spaces, especially these internet spaces, because of the internet, it's created a lot of these different micro communities where people come out of these micro communities. They have their own language in these micro communities where you can hear these people talking and you don't even know what these people are even talking about. Right? So now going back to the finance side, right? Going back to the money side, you can be listening to somebody talk about investing. You can be on an earnings call and you'll hear something called basis points. And you may not know what that means. And so they can say, hey, we are going to be up, 7 basis points, right? 700 basis points, this year. And you may not know what that means. And then they'll keep going, right, with the particular conversation kind of based on that framework. And you can get lost in it because you don't understand what they mean when they say, hey, we expect an increase of 100 basis points this quarter, or we expect a decrease in margin of profit, right, by 100 basis points this quarter. And it's really designed to where if you don't know this terminology, you can't follow what we're saying. But the concept is really basic, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So if somebody says 100 basis points, they're really talking about 1%, right? And they're really talking about $10. And they also really talking about 1 point. So all these words pretty much mean the same thing. If I say we're going to be up 100 basis points, it means we're going to be up 1%, which is going to be a $10 move, which would be 1 point. So I can say, hey, we went up 1 point today. That means we went up $10 or 1% move, right? That's all it really means. But if a person doesn't know those, I've seen people describe stock movements in points. It was up 20 points today. Well, if a person doesn't know what points means and what that actually means, they won't know what the person's saying. But really, conceptually, it's really easy to understand once you understand the framework and the breakdown. So if I say we're going to be up 400 basis points, means we're going to be up 4% or 4 points, right? So then when I'm on an earnings call and they're saying that we expect the margin of profit to be down by 400 basis points this quarter, it's relatively easy to understand once you understand the jargon. But they'll use the jargon to keep you out. So here's something I want to really encourage you to do. When you're listening to this type of stuff, write down what it means or write down what you hear, and you just can go look it up on the internet. Because it's not like this is some hidden information, right? It's not like you got to have a PhD or a graduate degree to understand it. It's just jargon in the particular space. So, if you go into the crypto space, they got all kind of little words they use, right? And that's something I've told them for years is that the problem is that the crypto space is for crypto nerds. The reason why they haven't gotten the adoption, because they haven't figured out how to make it to where the average person can come into that space and understand what people are talking about. Because they very much made it a badge of honor to where we have this little language that we use and nobody understands this language unless they're in these spaces. So I don't know about nodes and none of that. I don't care about any of that stuff either. I just care about making money. I don't care to know about that stuff because the person that knows how to make money off that stuff, and we've seen this time and time again, they make more money than the people that know about the nodes and the hashes and all that type of stuff, right? So what I want you to understand is that if you hear this type of stuff in the financial space, a lot of this stuff is easy to go Google. If I'm looking at an accounting balance sheet and I look at a line entry and I don't understand what it means, it's easy for me to go Google it because the information is not hidden. And then once you start to understand the language of these spaces, you now can listen and follow the conversations. And you really start to realize that a lot of these people that are getting paid to do stuff, they really don't know what you think they know. They just have their own language. But they don't have some type of secret knowledge or some type of hidden knowledge. They just have 50 definitions. They have 50 words that they use that they include in their conversations. and you'll think that they know something. So I see this a lot in the men's fitness space, where these guys use a lot of drugs, and they'll use these words like recomp, which is really slang for recomposition. So it's say like, he's going to do this and see, can you get body recomp? And they just really just body recomposition. But they want to make it seem like they know something. So they use this jargon based around men's health. And all these guys really know how to do is just pump steroids. They don't really know anything about men's fitness. They just know how to take steroids. But they have their own jargon in this space to where if you're new to the space and you listen to these guys talk, they hit you with so much jargon, you'll think they know something, right? Because it seems like they're talking a totally different language. But once you really understand like just basic health and fitness, you realize that these guys don't know anything, but the biggest audience is for the people that don't know anything. So that's what I want you to understand, is that once you kind of get into this space of investing and finance, you realize that there's maybe like 50 words that you got to learn. And it's not like you got to learn them in a week. You'll learn them over time. And once you learn like those 50 words, you can follow every conversation, right? Because the conversations are really not that difficult. They try to make it seem difficult to gatekeep the information, to make it seem like they're the only people that can understand this, and you can't. You don't need to be a quant to learn how to make money in the markets. But they made it seem as if you do. But if that was the case, then all the quants will make all the money, but that's not what's going on. So then it's obvious you don't need to be a quant, and you don't need to learn, very complicated mathematics to make money in these spaces. But they make it seem like you do, because that's how they gatekeep the information. So that if you can't learn this high level, quantitative mathematics, then you can't do this. But that's what they know, but they still don't make any money, right? Or you got to learn, coding. And if you can't learn this really complicated coding, you can't be in this space. But they know the coding, but they still can't make money. So it can't be the coding then. So that's what I want you to understand, is that a lot of this stuff is language that's used to gatekeep a space, to make people feel like they can't participate in it because they don't know these specific terms and specific terminology. But a lot of times, once you learn the terminology, you start to realize that the concepts are really, really simple. And a lot of this male health and fitness space, a lot of that you see on the internet, is just a lot of steroid taking. These guys don't know nothing about being in shape or fitness because, again, they've never produced an athlete. These guys have just took steroids. But if you ask them, there's a guy that used to train Jordan and Kobe and those guys, right? He's not in that space because why? He's actually produced athletes. These guys that have produced no athletes got a million words that they use to conversate about being in shape and fitness and yada, 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 but they produce no athletes. No athletes have come out up under their tutelage or their education. It's just a bunch of guys pumping steroids. So you'll realize once you learn their jargon that a lot of times these people are not really talking about anything complicated. It's just they have a set of words that they try to use that gatekeep people from coming into the space, right? So anybody got any questions about that before we go ahead and get up on out of here? And again, my bad to Ant Dog. I'm going to get you back in. I hit the wrong button, bro. Chris Amerson, man, appreciate the $2 super chat. Ray Gun, man, appreciate the $2 super sticker. Big up again to the Wealth Scientist and Corporate Checks TV. Appreciate the $9.99 super sticker, right? So anybody got any questions about anything before we break? Yes, June, yes. So the course walks you from beginner to more complex methods. So that's just with the core course. The VIP course walks you from beginner to extremely more advanced trading methods, right? So, but you have to define what do you mean by start trading? How do you define it? Like we just talked about, make sure we're on the same page. So what do you mean by start trading, right? Because you can start trading now without any course. You can go get your brokerage account funded and start buying stuff. Like, you don't need me to do that, right? So what we try to teach you how to do is first manage risk properly, right? Really manage risk, understand the market from a macro and also a micro standpoint, right? And then understand how to successfully trade over time by teaching you how not to sabotage yourself as a trader. But you don't need me to start trading. You really don't. You can go start a brokerage account without me. You can fund it without me, and you can buy contracts without me. You don't need me to be involved in that at all, to be very frank with you. So then we need to understand, what do we mean as start trading? But if you just want to trade, you don't need me at all to do that. You can do that without me, right? Taylor D says, when I was learning futures after having success with options, the language terms is the biggest hurdle for me is light work. Yeah, definitely. Because again, Taylor, the concepts are really basic around futures. It's just the language. But then once you learn the language, you realize this ain't really nothing different than what I've always been doing, right? But it's just, I got to learn the language of this space. Same thing if we go to the equity space. It's just a language, you know. Cedric Webb says, my theories of financial markets created this language as a pseudo barrier because they can no longer erect physical or technical barriers to prevent people from getting to the space. I 100% agree with you, right? I 100% agree with you. But we'll see this, Mr. Webb, in all spaces. If you go to college, you'll meet people in certain fields, and they're really not that smart. They really aren't. They just took tests, and we also talked about how they cheat on tests, but they just have their own language. And it can take time for you to learn their language. And then they sometimes, and we've seen this, people start inventing words. And then we've seen other groups take other words and they run with it. So like, you know, I remember when people were saying woke, and then we had a lot of online commentators. They now took the word woke and they ran with it, right? Or the word based. Now, you might not remember the word based, right? I remember saying the word based like early 2000s. And then a lot of these online conservative entertainers, they took the word based and they ran with the word. But I remember that word came out, right? So what I want you to I want people to realize is that a lot of this stuff is just terminology and language based on certain communities. And then if you're not in that community, you'll go in and be like, I don't know what these people are talking about. Like, it's like so an example, I grew up going to church. But when I came in and started finding out about a lot of these online faith-based people, I didn't know what these people are talking about because they got their own language. Because a lot of what they talk about is not even in the Bible, right? So you'll get that to where it's a way in which they create commonality, they create rapport, they create, I forgot what that particular word is. Cohesion is they create a language and then everybody kind of gets on the same page. It's not a negative or a positive, it's just what it is. But I agree with you. But you'll see a lot of this if you go to colleges, where you'll meet people in certain spaces and they really don't know a lot, but they just know the language of those spaces, right? But if you really sit down and talk to them, you'd be like, these people are really not that sharp, but they just, how would you say it? They were just very diligent to get through the work. Yeah, so again, we take you from basic all the way up into more advanced concepts. So yes. So let me know if that answered your question. Yeah, definitely. Every technical, but not just technical areas, non-technical areas have its own language. Once, in my experience, once people build a community around something, they create their own language. That's part of building a community. So that's why I was saying, where I'm from, we'll call an ounce of weed an onion. Where in another part of the country, they may call an ounce of weed something else. Now, these young people won't know that an ounce of weed is called an onion because they're not buying ounces, right? They not, right? They buying grams and they think they're doing something. But where I'm from, if you couldn't get even a certain, you don't even pick the phone up. What you doing trying to, they running down grams now. So so like I said, I didn't come out of a community where we was trying to run down a gram. Like, we wouldn't even do that. But now when you're talking to younger generations, they trying to run down grams. So in their communities, that's the thing to do. So a lot of it is where you raised, yada, yada, yada. So different parts of the country, people talk about different stuff. And then now you get a lot of merging of that because of the internet, where people now get exposed to different terminology from different parts of the country because of the internet. But they'll take the word and make it mean what they want it to mean, even though that word might have come from a different part of the country. So I would say even the non-technical areas have their own language. Like I said, I've been to college, and non-technical areas have their own language, right? Even though they might not be very technical. right? Just different communities have their own language. You know, just it is what it is. So we got any questions before we get up on out of here? So if you're looking like an accounting statements and you don't know what it means, you can Google 99% of it, right? Like 99% of stuff that's on an accounting statement can be Googled. So people ask me, how did I learn how to look at accounting statements? I looked at the line items, and if I did understand what it meant, I just Googled it. Because unless a person is really trying to hide stuff, most accounting statements are going to be very, very cut and dry, right? Only time it starts getting complicated, they start trying to hide stuff, right? So no disrespect to all my accountants, they have expertise and experience in the area, but a lot of the fundamental basics can be taught or learned by the average person if they're willing just to read, right? Now doing it is something different, but they can understand how I like to read a balance sheet, right? That's not anything that's over the average person's head. It just takes reading. That's why I push reading so much. So Ms. Williams say 100% correct. Appreciate Ms. Williams for coming through. Yeah, Ms. Williams, I had to take for my major, I had to take managerial and principles. So principles was the intro course, and I also had to take managerial. But for our final, for principles, we had to do a statement of retained earnings. Because the guy used to be an actual accountant in real life, and he was like, if you can't do a statement of retained earnings, he says, I don't matter. I don't care what test you passed. He says, you have to actually be able to do it. So we had to do a statement of retained earnings for the final, which it wasn't easy because we had to do it all by hand. But I learned the process of doing it. But what he taught me, which I've always looked when I look at companies, and it really opened my eyes up to like how a lot of things work, because he taught me, because he worked in small business accounting, is that a lot of companies have cash flow issues, right? And I realized that when I became a independent professional, and then when I'm looking at a lot of businesses, like I told people before, like I can tell with most businesses, they're going to do an offer, they're going to do a raise because they need money. A lot of businesses have cash flow issues. So yeah, I learned that early on, that a lot of this stuff can be learned, because I definitely wasn't trying to be an accountant, but I had to take those 2 accounting classes for my major. And so I learned, like, I can learn this stuff, even though this is not going to be my space, right? Because he also taught me you don't have to memorize a lot of these accounting formulas. He's like, you can just go look it up if you know what you need to do. But he says a lot of teachers feel like you got to memorize all this. So it's like, no, just go look it up. But you just have to know what formula you need to do what you need to do as an accountant. But he actually was a small business accountant for like decades. And then because he was ex-military, he was able to go and teach it. But I'm a big fan of that. I think a lot of people, especially if you're trying to learn how to trade, should either take an online accounting class or take one at the community college, unless you just want to be all technical and just look at charts all day. So you never heard of Hammer. Okay, I feel you. Do you have members group? We're not necessarily connected to investment classes, but once in a quarter meetup where people discuss how they're coming along with their projects. I do not, but if you want to start one, I'll join it. But I don't have one currently at the time. I know By the Hood may have something like that for you though. So that's something I would reach out to them about. By the Hood may have something like that. Corporate Checks is Investopedia. They do. They give real good definitions, right? So Cedric Webb, good question. How can you tell if some terms are relevant to the industry? Is just fluff? Cedric Webb, I just think it takes experience. If you sit in the space long enough and you hear people talk and you kind of understand what they're saying, you now start to realize whether or not a person is actually kind of getting to the point, or if they're just word salading through the situation. So I just think it takes experience. Over time, you'll realize, okay, this person is really speaking to what's actually going on. And this other person is just using a lot of really good words that have very little to do with what's actually going on, but they're just doing a word salad, right? And I just think that takes experience. It takes discernment. And what I mean by discernment is it takes the ability to evaluate what you're hearing and determine whether or not it's relevant to the situation, or whether or not it's just a word salad. So one of the biggest challenges I had with the Black PhD is he would word salad a lot. right? Because that's what his audience wanted. Because some audiences want word salad. They just want somebody that just uses a lot of words. He would word salad a lot. And my thing was, it took you 45 minutes to say that. You could have said that in 10 minutes and we could have got up on out of here. But I think some audiences, they like the word salad, right? Well, I was just like, and I think a lot of people go too extreme. When they feel like you don't want the word salad, then what they do is they try to get real short. But it's not about being short. It's about, let me give an example. When you may not know who the rapper Eminem is, you may know. Eminem used to be like a 1,000,000-word rapper. He has old music that came out before he got signed. He was one of them guys that would rap and they just would rap nonstop for like 10 minutes. Like that was his style. When he got with Dre, Dre had to teach him, okay, everything that you was going to say in 10 minutes, you got 16, 16, and 16 to say all of that. And so he had to teach Eminem to take 10 minutes worth of just rapping, and do 16 bars, 16 bars, 16 bars. So I don't know what 16 times 3 is. Y'all go ahead and tally that up. And that's what you had to take 10 minutes of figuring out. And so I think a lot of people, when somebody tells them that they're a little bit verbose, they take it as an insult. And then what they do now is they say, well, I'm just not going to say nothing. I'm going to just make it like 2 sentences or 3 sentences. Well, no, you just got to figure out how to take what you're saying in 45 minutes and conflate it into 2 minutes. Like we talk about in the business space. If somebody asks you what your business is, we call it like an elevator pitch. You should be able to boil that down into 2 or 3 sentences to where if you're in an elevator with somebody for like 15 to 30 seconds, you can explain what you do in 2 to 3 sentences, right? So that's kind of the thing, is that once you hang around long enough, you can kind of start to discern. And what I mean by discern is that you can evaluate what people are saying and you can realize, okay, they're really not saying anything. And this person really is. So because I spend so much time in these spaces and I look at a lot of stuff and I read a lot of stuff, like I know that most financial professionals that come from the CFP side or come from the investing side, they just talking. Even the CFAs, they pass the test, but it's not as if they have some type of special knowledge. It doesn't exist. But I can speak to that because I actually know how this stuff works in real life. And I talk to people that run money in the real world, right? And they actually run money and they don't talk like any of these people. So because I have that exposure and then I have the education where I self-educated myself, I know that a lot of these people are making money on an ignorant population. And if the population just brings up their level of education just a little bit, a lot of these people won't be able to make any money because they're not really bringing any specialized skill. An accountant is actually bringing specialized skills to the table, right? They do things that I can't do. I can put myself in a 60-40 fund without anybody's help. I don't need help for that. But if I don't know what a 60-40 fund is, I don't even know how bonds are supposed to be inverse to the equity market, yada, yada, yada. I don't know those fundamental principles. A person can pitch me on this stuff and then I'll pay them to do it. And they haven't really done anything, but they want their commission though. So that's a great question. I just really think it takes exposure to the space for an extended period of time. So Alexander Williams says, Jay used to have that 10 rap style back in the early 90s. It was a style made for hardcore fans. I feel you. Okay, so it's 48. Okay, so appreciate y'all doing the math. So yeah, so you had to take all that, put it in 48 bars, and so that took work, but it allowed him to become, a double-digit millionaire because nobody's going to listen to you rap for 10 minutes straight, bro. Like we can't even put that on radio. So he had to be willing to have Dre say, okay, you got to take everything that you're doing and you have to boil it down to 48 bars. And then it can be even different if you're in a group. So if we're in a group and it's 3 people or it's 2 people, you now got less time to rap, right? But you used to just rap. So a lot of people got to kind of understand that one of the challenges I had with the Black PhD, or, there's a guy that makes a lot of money in the legal space and he does like 3-hour live streams. I don't know how you talk for 3 hours straight. Like I don't have that kind of energy. Right. But he makes more money than me on YouTube because there's an audience of people that want to listen to somebody talk for 3 hours straight. I don't have that kind of energy. Like it took literally 2 years for me to be able to talk on here for an hour. I would talk on here for 30 minutes and cut this thing off and go do something else. I don't know how somebody talks for 3.5 hours and just be talking and just be talking. I don't know how you do it. And it's not like it's a dialogue. It's just one person talking. I don't know how you do that. Right. But their audience wants that. They want to cut the person on, go grocery shopping, come home, unload all their groceries, eat a meal, and come back and a person still online. That's what they like. I didn't build an audience of people that wanted that because I can't do that. You know, senior, what's the guy from TVT? His nephew does like 8-hour live streams. He makes a lot of money. I don't know how you sit on the internet for 8 hours. Like, I don't know how you do it. But so I just think it's what people want and finding an audience for that. But a lot of what a lot of these people do, it can be boiled down into a much shorter situation. But again, it's what the audience wants. Some audiences want, you know, a Kasane, and they just watch this dude sit in a chair and go crazy for 6 hours, you know, and they got that kind of free time. I don't have that kind of free time, but big up to them. So we got any other questions? Big up for everybody coming through. Cedric Webb says the terms used in the financial space evergreen, meaning they don't change. Great question. Good questions this morning, Mr. Webb. I don't know what time it is out there where you at. I think you on mountain time. So I know it's probably early. Some of them are, right? Some of them are, I would call recent terms. So let me give an example. Pretty much everything that you're going to see like in accounting, in the finance space, is going to be evergreen. A lot of the terms that have come out of the tech space, like unicorn, are recent terms, right? Because where I'm from, a unicorn was an actual unicorn animal. Then they started applying that to companies and saying, what's a unicorn company, right? So a lot of the terms that come out of like valuation, but they try to insert certain stuff like evaluating, how we evaluate companies, how we value companies from a financial standpoint, looking at accounting. A lot of the actual hardcore finance terms are evergreen. But then when you look at kind of like the startup tech space, they kind of created a lot of these new terms that may not even exist in 5 years, right? But I had to learn like what it means by a unicorn company, because we know unicorns are not real, you know? So people will say, well, this is a unicorn company. Well, unicorns aren't real. So I had a hard time figuring out what the reference point was, right? So some of them are, but I would say, in my opinion, over 90% of the terminology, it has stood the test of time. So basis points we talked about, that stood the test of time, right? Margin of profit, operating margin, operating income, expenses, return on equity, return on assets, you know, all those things have stood the test of time. You know what I'm saying? Operating leverage has stood the test of time. You know, debt to equity ratio, debt to income. These things have all stood the test of time, right? And so when somebody's saying, well, we have leverage because I take on a lot of debt, but I use that debt to make money. When I understand conceptually what it means, it's very easy to understand, but they'll use a lot of words to make it seem like it's this complicated thing, but really it's just I use debt to make money, right? And as long as I can take on debt at a lower interest rate or a lower cost of capital, then I'm able to make money at a higher. So let me give an example. I'm taking on debt for 8%, but I'm able to get a return on that capital at 25%. I'm going to do that all day, right? So then once we understand that concept, then we understand things like the carry trade, where we go loan out yen and we use that to invest in the United States. And the return on the investments in the United States are greater than the cost of loaning the yen or borrowing the yen, right? We do that all day as long as the numbers make sense. So the concepts are relatively easy, but we have to understand the terminology, because they'll use the terminology, Mr. Webb, the carry trade. And if we don't know what the carry trade is, we won't know what they're talking about. But it really means that normally I go to a foreign country, I use their capital to pay back at a really, really low interest rate. I go to a country where I can get a return on capital at a higher rate. And as long as the numbers make sense, because I got a good accountant or a good quant, which means I have a good person that understands quantitative mathematics, I do that all day, as long as the numbers make sense. And the only way that gets disturbed is if the country in which I'm borrowing the capital from, if that interest rate starts to move up to where it no longer makes sense, then I stopped doing it, right? So you'll hear the term carry trade, you hear the term quant. They'll use these jargons and we'll think they're talking about something complicated. And really, they're just talking about, I'm going somewhere, loaning some money at a certain percentage, going somewhere else, investing that money, getting a higher percentage back, paying back the money I loan. And as long as there's a margin in between those two, that makes sense. I just keep doing that all day. They're not doing anything complicated. So that's like me going to you, Mr. Webb, and I'm borrowing money from you at 1%. And I'm able to take that money and go somewhere else and get 8% back on that money. I do that all day until you stop allowing me to get that money at 1%. Or I can no longer get a return at 8%, right? It's really basic, but I'll put words around it because then I want to sell it to somebody else. I can't let them know how simple it is because then they won't buy it. I got to make it seem like it's this big thing, right? So that's kind of the smoke and mirrors that this space kind of works on. Do new terms in the space represent someone in a group trying to distinguish their perspectives? Yeah, I mean, it's just they're trying to differentiate themselves, right? Because really, Mr. Webb, finance is really make more money than what it costs you to make the money. That's really the basis of finance, right? So that's just, it's real simple. The whole concept of finance is that how can I make more money than what it costs me to make the money? There are certain ways to do that are relatively safe, right? If I want to sell myself outside of those particular areas, similar to Kathy Wood, I have to try to figure out how to differentiate myself in the marketplace, right? Because the most common ways to get a return on capital is U.S. Treasuries and the overall market, right? So I don't think you was in the community before I put out that PDF about the biggest mistakes you can make as an investor. To talk about like risk-adjusted returns. So the largest outside of the bond market, right? And even though we're talking about the bond market, but the two easiest ways to get a return on your capital here in the United States is just go buy U.S. debt or go buy the overall market, right? If I'm trying to start a fund, Mr. Webb, I have to separate myself from those two places because people can already go do that. They don't need me for that, right? They don't need me at all. So I start the XYZ whatever fund. And then I create a language around what I'm doing to make what I'm doing seem so different to where it makes sense for somebody to take the risk of doing what I'm doing. You see what I'm saying? So they're just trying to differentiate themselves as what we're doing is different. So you have Vivek and those other guys, they started like an anti-woke fund because they were saying that all the big hedge funds are going woke. And so we're going to start an anti-woke fund. But if you look at what they're investing in, and it's on my video when I talked about Vivek, I got so many videos, I can't even find half of them half the time. All they was doing was buying energy stocks. They weren't doing like, because there's nowhere, where you going to put the money at? So all they were doing was taking private money and buying energy stocks, but talking it up like this is an anti-woke, I think they were calling it like ESG or whatever type fund. That's like, they're not doing anything. But if I don't know anything, I will buy their pitch and not really realize all they're doing is buying energy and like NVIDIA. Because I was able to look at their fund breakdown. So really it's just people trying to differentiate themselves because we live in America, we're really blessed to where we can buy our US debt, which is always guaranteed to pay out. And then we can buy the overall US stock market and we can get like 8 to 9% a year. For most people, they don't need to do anything different than that because they don't want to learn nothing, right? So really trying to help people get even in those spaces, right? Even though it seems really boring, but it'd be a blessing to them because a lot of people are trying to do a lot of different stuff that they don't really understand what they're doing. And they just need to go ahead and take that 8-9%, man, and sit their butt down because that's what they built for. You know, everybody not built to trade. They think they are, but they not built for it. They don't have the psychology for it, and they don't want to learn the space. Avi says, appreciate your breakdown. People do tend to overcomplicate and oversell systems. They don't have a choice. They got to do something different because why? I can get 5% guaranteed on the US debt and I can get 8 to 9% overall market return. So if we're going to take more risk, I have to make it worth my while and have to make it seem like it's worth somebody's while. So, I mean, I have to do what I got to do. Like, that's just how this game works. It's not going to work another way. In a different part of the world, we wouldn't have that problem, but I mean, I can get 5% guaranteed, especially like 2 years ago. You could get 5%. You could get almost 6% on a 2 year, like 2 years ago. You ain't got to talk to nobody if you can get that. I wouldn't even entertain these dudes. It's a little different now because they lowered the rate. Do you think there should be universal curriculum for all financial professionals to start from and then venture into niches after series 6, 7, 3, etc.? Great question, Alonzo Hall. I think it depends on what people are doing. A lot of the licensing that has to be done is a license and a certification. I'll make sure I don't get that word wrong. Okay. I'll put it to you like this. A lot of the testing that people are getting is so they can sell a product. But it doesn't mean they really know the stuff. It means they can sell a product. Okay. Big up. You says licensing. Appreciate it. So licensing. So a lot of the licensing, but everybody don't have licensing though. So like CFPs don't have licensing. They don't want to tell you that though. Right. But a lot of the education that people are going after is often so they can sell a product in the financial space. It doesn't mean they really know what they're talking about as far as how to actually generate a return on capital. It means they know enough to not misinform somebody on what the product actually does. Right? But it doesn't mean they know how to get alpha out of the market. Right? It doesn't mean that. Right? So one of the things that we have to understand is that a lot of people, because of the way the system is set up, again, it's gatekeeping again, is we'll make you take this test to sell a product, right? But it doesn't mean you know how to generate alpha. It means you understand how this particular product works that's being sold by your firm that's licensed to sell this product. So you know the details of the product, but it don't mean you know how to generate alpha. Because for years, a lot of these brokers made money on commissions of trades. They didn't make money because they generated alpha, right? That's not how they made their money. They made their money on trade commission volume, right? That's why. So now we're in a space where the passive funds are so big, those particular type of funds are not as attractive unless you have large amounts of private money, right? Because the big vanguards, they're so big, they're running so much money through a passive fund. The individual funds trying to sell you on individual stocks and trying to sell you these individual products, unless you got a lot of money, they're really not as attractive as they were, let's say 15, 20 years ago. And then also now you don't have to utilize them because as a retail person, you can open up your own brokerage account. You can buy what you want to buy. I don't have to go through a brokerage and have them help me buy anything. So they get a small commission on every trade I make, but I don't have to go through their gates where 35, 40 years ago, I had to call up to New York City or call up to Chicago and then ask somebody to buy something on my behalf. And then everybody got paid as they walked me through that system. And that's really how they made their money. I don't have to do that anymore. So I think the curriculum needs to change on how does this stuff actually work in the real world, not on you're going to learn a bunch of facts that are going to describe a product. But when you sit down and talk to these people, they don't really know how this stuff works in the real world, right? But they know how to sell a product. That's because that's what they was trained on. But they don't really, and some of them, Kathy Wood saying that, she's putting out these price targets and stuff. She just, come on, man. She got all the licenses though, but she just, she putting on. Might be to watch. Appreciate the $2 super chat. I like the car and the avatar. I don't know what kind of car that is though. Can you do some content on retail accredited institutional investor in the near future? I mean, I'll see. I've done content on hedge funds. I've done content on market cap. I've done content on retail people actually investing and trading. So I think I have some of that content actually in the library, right? Because we've done a lot of coverage on trying to get retail people in these spaces. Because there is no difference in understanding unless you have experience in retail accredited and institutional investors, right? It's really based on understanding what is the difference between institutional and retail and accredited. But between a retail and a person that's a quote unquote accredited investor, there's really no difference outside of understanding, right? Because just because you have a certain net worth, it don't mean you know how to invest. Like, that doesn't mean anything. It just means you got a certain amount of, what's his name can be an accredited investor. The guy that has all those kids from all those different women that plays basketball for Minnesota. He'll be an accredited investor. He don't know the first thing about investing, because if he did, he'd buy up all of Oakland City. He just know how to get girls pregnant and put the ball through the hoop. That don't mean anything, in my opinion. But I'm very pessimistic on and very cynical around what is taught in a lot of financial spaces, because I took finance classes for my degree. I study these markets, and I talk to a lot of people that run money, and I know a lot of people that lose money with all the licensings and stuff in the world, and they lose people's money. They're just good at raising money because of their network, but they're not really good at running money professionally. But they're good at raising money. That's how they stick around. So it's a McLaurin. Okay, big up to you. All right, so we're going to get up on out of here. I want to be here too long. Y'all stay safe. And I want to really encourage you to do the reading, do the study, to learn the language of these particular spaces. None of this stuff is over your head. The math is not over your head. It's really not that complicated. You don't have to be a quant to make money. They've been making money in these markets before any of this quant stuff came out. And they're going to keep doing it if it goes away. A lot of this math can be done with a basic calculator, a basic financial calculator that you can get off Amazon for like $30, right? And a lot of accounting mathematics can be done with a basic calculator you can get off Amazon with $30, $40. You just have to learn what needs to be learned for you to do what you need to do, and then just get really good at doing that. So hope you got some value from it. Talk to you later, man. Stay safe.